That's the sound of sheep. And the reason we have the sound of the sheep is this is for shepherds, or at least under shepherds. I want to apologize to you guys for kind of slacking off on these pastors' chats. We make all kinds of pledges and promises, and then part of it was the COVID-19 thing. It was hard to get together. In fact, I'm sure that Jerry and I, who are on this pastor's chat this time, are both going to die because we're sitting a pretty good distance from each other, but it's not quite 6 feet. And we decided that it would be best this time, given where our country is and what we're going through right now, that it'd be best to have a white guy and a black guy just sit down and talk. Jerry Parries, by the way, and I'm no longer a pastor. I used to be paid for being good, and now I'm good for nothing. But I did it for a lot of years, longer than some of you have been alive, and I can get to heaven without grace for simply having survived. But at any rate, Jerry Parries is the pastor of the Christian Family Worship Center, the place of grace.
Yeah.
I quote him everywhere I go. One of the best statements he ever made is that you'll run out of sin before God runs out of grace.
Yes.
You have no idea how people, when they hear that, rejoice in it.
Wow.
And realize how powerful it is. And Jerry is a man I love deeply. And I might say that Jerry loves me deeply. And
that is absolutely true.
And we've been friends for a long time. And Jerry's taught me a lot. He's made me sensitive. We don't always agree politically.
That's true.
And when we first got together with our grace conferences, he said, "Can you deal with the fact that a lot in my community don't agree with you?" And he looked at me, and I said, "Why are you looking at me?" But I've been sensitized in some real ways. I don't define racism the way a lot of people do, so I'm not a racist in the way I define it.
Mm-hmm.
But with that being said, for instance, and I could go on in a whole bunch of other ways, Jerry, but as the opioid crisis came, and all of a sudden there was a big deal about it in this country. And, the president got on that bandwagon, and all the House and the Senate, and a lot of money was given to set up drug centers. And Jerry and I were having lunch, and he said, that's been a part of the black community for a long time. And nobody ever created clinics for us.
Not at all.
And I said, well, that's because, and then I thought, oh my, I know he's right. He's got a point. And and we're going to talk in a minute. I'm not going to do all the talking, but Jerry's introduced me to his friend, Herb Andrews, Bishop Herb Andrews, and we had him on our talk show. And as you know, Jerry, and you love him, he's kind and gentle, but boy, he speaks truth.
He does.
And he had been detained shortly before that, stopped in his car wearing a clerical collar. And they handcuffed him in front of everybody. He had all the documentation. And I said to him, "Herb, that make you angry?" He said, "Well, some, but it made me really sad." And he said, when I watched what happened to Floyd, he said, I was angry some, but he said, I cried.
Yeah.
I wept. And so I think a place where Jerry and I can start is a great sadness for what's happened in our country, the hatred and the division and the racism, and the pain on both sides of these issues. I mean, it's
Yeah.
everywhere you go. And the thing about people like me and Jerry is that we're Christians, and we're Christians clearly.
Yeah.
And we've been given revealed truth. And the problem with the great majority of our country is that they don't have an anchor. They got anger, but they've got no anchor. Nothing that says this is right and this is wrong. This is the way to walk. This is not the way to walk. And at the very heart of where we are, it's God's grace.
Yeah.
You don't by accident call your church a place of grace. It really is. I love going there. And so as Jerry and I talk about some of these issues, I hope that some of the things that we say for pastors will be helpful.
Yeah.
But I think the most helpful thing is that we love each other. We both profoundly get grace and see that as the key to almost everything. All right, I finished my sermon. I'm going to let you say something because I'm a racist and I give permission, okay?
Well, let me tell you something. First of all, thank you for having me. It is always an honor to sit in this chair and sit on the other side of you.
That goes both ways.
Yeah, I do, with all of my heart, love you. I tell my wife all the time, I love a white man who's an old man, but he's a good guy. Steve, these are tough times.
They are.
They are really, really tough times. And I want to kind of help explain to our audience, kind of tell a little quick story, and hopefully you could understand how the African American community feels at this time. What has happened to Floyd and what we saw all on camera. It is not that racism has. I think Will Smith said something to this effect. I won't get it totally correct. He said, "It's not that racism is getting worse. Racism is getting filmed."
Mm.
This happens in the African American community all the time. And we've been hollering about it. We've been screaming about it. We've been, Colin Kaepernick took a knee trying to bring awareness to it. This happens all the time. And it is a system that has been set up to do what it is doing. It is not a mistake. This system of police brutality has been the history of our people for years. You remember when the 3 civil rights workers were going through Mississippi for justice and the police arrested them. The police let them out of jail, but the police were the ones that caught up with them, killed them. And so we have a distrust for the police department based upon history. It's not just coming out of the sky. This just happens all the time. But here's what I want to mention. I want to mention this story, and it kind of, and it's a broad story, but I want you to see how we feel when there was a person that talked about that let's say, for instance, we were sitting down and we were playing Monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
You and I. Are you familiar with the game Monopoly?
I hate it.
But
if you ever see me playing Monopoly, you sell everything you own because Jesus is coming back. You dedicate your life to it.
I know that's right. But you sit down and you play Monopoly.
Okay.
You play Monopoly, and both of us are playing the game, and we accumulate houses, and we accumulate wealth. You accumulate wealth. But then you, as the person who owns the Monopoly game, take all of my wealth, take everything that I have, and then say, let's start the game over. But now you have all of my wealth, but you then turn and ask me to play the game of Monopoly again with bricks with no straw. And the African American community, time after time, have played Monopoly I remember when the Tulsa, uh, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street. We had our in 1921. We had our own businesses. We had our own banks, and we were building our own wealth. And the community, the white community, came in and plummeted and rioted and tore the whole city down. And then we go back and restart again. In Rosewood here in Florida. Uh, Building our own wealth, building our own businesses. The white community came in and tore it completely down. And so there's this relationship of whenever we do try to build or have built that George Floyd, and this is why I'm going back to George Floyd, is the symbol of a knee being put on our necks to stop us from moving forward or somehow destroying that which we have tried to build over the years. And so it you said something about both of us being Christians, which I love. You are so unique, Steve. This is so unique because you're using your platform to talk about this issue, but there are so many Christians that have a platform that's not talking about race in their pulpits to their people. And so, where do we go as believers when even our white brothers and sisters that are Christians don't even discuss race in their church? And they are supposed to be the light in a dark place. And so, I want to encourage every pastor. I know I'm rambling, but I want to encourage every pastor, every preacher, to share with your congregation that the sin of racism is wrong, and they must speak up and be about helping to bring reconciliation to this issue.
I agree with that, and I agree with your definition of racism. I mean, that is in your face. I mean, the kinds of things you're talking about are absolute. They should be preached on from the pulpit because the scripture's so clear on that and
Yeah.
how violating the very essence of what God says about human beings is very true.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with that. And I would suggest to the pastors that are listening, do it.
Yes.
Do it with awareness of what the issues are, of maybe an awareness that people would disagree about some things. But at that point, if African Americans and white Christians can't agree at something that basic
Mm-hmm.
and that clear, we
Mm-hmm.
got a real problem.
Yeah, I think we do too. I think. I
Oh, I
think.
do too.
I think that we have to be honest that when we look at a person's color, regardless of who it is, if this is an African American community, and we have forgiven and we forgive and we come back and forgive. I remember when what was the gentleman's name? Dylan, who killed Roof Dylan or Dylan Roof, who killed the 9
Yeah,
people
yeah.
in
Oh,
Charlotte.
yeah.
Yeah, Charlottesville, and here the whole church comes to and forgive this guy. African Americans are not. We are forgiving people. I mean, they forgave him, and how the police arrested here. Here's an example: police arrest him, takes him to Burger King's. He kills 9 people. Arrest him, take him to Burger King's. But then you take an African American who don't even have a firearm, get arrested, brutalized, sometimes shot. It's the difference in the justice system, and
I
those
hear that.
things need to be
I hear
spoken
that.
up.
Oh boy, they do.
Yeah,
And they need to be spoken of by all Christians because
absolutely.
what I said about there being no anchor, there really is one. And when we lose ours, we lose the very thing that we have.
Absolutely. And Jesus is that anchor, and grace is that anchor. But it can't just be words from the pulpit. It has to be actions from the heart.
Now, as a white guy, there's always other issues that play in it too.
Okay.
And I'm not going to go into those, but black on black crime,
Mm-hmm.
the importance of Christians in the black community also dealing with the kinds of things and the recognition that calls for the removal of the police themselves rather than the sensitizing of good ones and the firing of bad ones, there's got to be a recognition that that's a hard place for a policeman to walk sometimes.
Yeah. Well, let me talk about black on black crime. When when you put any group of people, because the white on white crime is the same thing, but no one has ever talked about white on white crime. It's the same as black on black crime. Wherever the majority of the people are, they
Oh, I agree with that.
criminalize each other.
But you also gotta look at the degree of it, and you just can't get around those facts. The reason that black families hate the idea of police not coming into their communities is they want their children to be safe.
Absolutely.
And so the call for the removal, not only is it not biblical according to Romans, the removal of the authority that says you will not go here, we can't go there.
Oh, I agree. By the way, let me make sure that I set on a record that I think
I
that
know
is
you don't have to even say it.
absolutely crazy.
I know you do.
To
I think
to suggest to remove the police.
I
that-
knew you would say that.
That is absolutely
And
ludicrous.
I agree too that that white on white crime, nobody talks about it.
Yeah.
But it has to be addressed in the black community also, and we've got to talk about it, because
Right.
if we don't, we're only talking and I think the only people that can talk about both of these issues and a bunch of others are people like you and me.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we enact now, as an African American man, I want every criminal, I don't care who, black, white, blue, green, arrested.
And I want some white collar ones arrested too.
Arrested, put under the jail. I have no problem with that. I think T.D. Jakes said this the other day. Here's what we want. When someone who does wrong get arrested, we want them to get arrested and taken to jail and go to court for due process. We don't want them to get arrested, tried, convicted, and assassinated all at the same time.
But of course,
Right.
I
So,
agree with that.
right.
And I know of the instances where that has not been true.
yeah.
I do think that, and this is something that is very rarely recognized,
Mm-hmm.
is that there has been a general awareness of the crimes and the sin and the racism in our country, and a growth. I grew up in the South, and I've seen the growth where the President of the United States could be an African American,
Yeah.
and where the mayors of almost all of the major cities are African American, and the power structure of those cities is African American. And so I think that, we got to repent and be clear about the kinds of things you're talking about. And it needs to be said over and over again, no matter how uncomfortable it is.
Right. There's a responsibility on all of our parts. But one of the things that happened with black on black crime, Dr. Steve, is that the low income.
But that's not a race issue.
That's economic risk.
Yeah, it
right,
is.
right.
I agree.
But it's an economic issue. But those who hold the power don't funnel funds into the African American community to supply jobs and those kind of things.
They say they do.
I know they say, but
I mean, our government says it does.
They
there's been a lot, in fact, trillions of dollars. But what's happened is that politicians got rich on it.
Yes.
And the money didn't get where. Yeah, I agree.
And let me make sure that I'm clear on this as well. I'm not Democrat, Republican. I'm for right.
That's what a Christian is for.
Right. And there's some crooked Democrats. There's some crooked Republicans. The only one that's right is Jesus. And the thing of it is, we got to find people who are saved and people who love Jesus, who are interested in running for office and support those people to get in office that are going to have the heart of Christ for poor people, because that's what Jesus is about. When I was hungry, you didn't feed me. I was naked, you didn't clothe me. We need people who are sensitive about people who are in serious need of help. And then those who can work and do what they're supposed to do, we hold them accountable to do that.
These issues, you and I could talk for hours and hours about, and if they gave us the power, we could fix it.
Yes, we would.
But they won't. But let me tell you something that goes to the heart of all of this that I've seen, and it's hit me recently reading Brant Hanson's book, The Truth About Us.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. It's a book written about self-righteousness.
Mm.
And I know, and I've watched your ministry. I've watched the people you've reached out to that others wouldn't, the really bad sinners.
Yeah.
And I suspect you do the same thing with racists. It blows me away, and I hope I do the same thing. I hope I kick posteriors, but I want to be clear about God's grace. But at the heart of all of this, when you start talking about the message of the Christian faith, one of the things, and Brant Hanson is funny, so you laugh on every other page, and the next page he slaps you upside the head with a 2x4, and all of a sudden you realize he was talking about how angry Jesus was, and he went into the temple and he drove out the money changers and the thieves, and his wife said, "But honey, you're the money changers." And once we realize that we're the money changers, that we're sinful, that there's none righteous, no, not one, then you start at a level where you can talk.
Right.
If we start at a level where, and this is, I've never seen so much self-righteousness.
Yes.
Coming from whites and blacks.
Absolutely.
And
I agree.
Everybody. I mean, it's incredible.
I agree.
From the presidency to right down to everybody.
Right.
Even in the marches.
Right.
It becomes the good guys against the bad guys. And this is one thing that you and I both agree on and have. In fact, this is the reason we got together.
Mm-hmm.
You were concerned that this message of grace be clearly proclaimed. I really believe that the gospel's the key to this.
Yes, I do too. In fact, I believe, Steve, that we, the Grace Conference that we had done the last few years was important. The answer.
I do too.
And my God, how important would that message be right now to see white churches and African American churches come together?
I agree.
And of course, we're coming together with our own history, but we're taking our history, putting it somewhat on the shelf, because you can't.
No, you
totally,
can't.
yeah.
Of course not.
But you put it in the back and put Christ in the front, and you work everything through Christ and not through your experience. And if we all do that, then how great it would be. Last point about this, I remember when Peter was eating with the Gentiles, and Paul, you know the story, and Paul and Peter jumped up when he saw the other Jews come. That was a racism moment there. And Paul stopped and said, "Hey, let me check you." And that's what good...
Called him a hypocrite.
Yeah, that's what good brothers and Christian brothers ought to do.
Identify.
Right. And say, "Hey, you can't do this.
Yeah.
You can't say this. This is not what Christ would do." And then we will have to have the love of Jesus enough to say,
stand with our brothers.
Right, and say, I'm sorry, I did that. I'm wrong. I repent.
Yeah.
And that's where reconciliation comes. But unless people are honest to do that, we're not going to ever reach that point. And I'm glad that I can come to you and talk to you about anything. And we can disagree, but then at the end, we're going to hug each other and love each other. And so the disagreement goes away as much as the love of Jesus Christ
and stuff
permeates.
Gets done with the disagreement. Because if we can talk, and that's the problem, nobody's talking.
Right.
I mean, people are just throwing rocks. And I get that. There's some places the rocks need to be thrown, but not as many.
Right.
As the totality that has been giving it. And by the way, I don't tell people you're my friend, but that's not because you're black. It's because you're ugly.
That is
Yeah,
funny.
well, no,
I saw something this morning on television that was so profound, Steve. You will love this. You will love this. The marchers were out marching. I don't remember the town. And then they had some other marchers on the other side that were against the protesters. Okay. And they were, screaming at each other,
Yeah.
and the street was in the middle. And all of a sudden, two of the protesters went over to the agitators or whoever, the side that wasn't agreeing with the Black Lives Matter movement. And the Black Lives Matter movement started hugging on the people who disagreed. Before you knew it, the whole line was hugging on each other, listening to each other. And then there was two guys that came in with KKK hats on, and both groups ran them away because they were both loving on each other, talking about the issues, even though they didn't agree. But the Holy Spirit spoke to me and say, love wins every single time.
Jerry and Jerry has so much more to say than what he said today. I mean, this guy is so thoughtful and has taught me so much. And I've been sensitized. I'm a better man because of Jerry. And I love him for that, but I loved him before that too. So, but maybe what I said at the beginning, it's not so much how we dissect the issues and solve them and what's next. How do we fix government and who do we elect? Maybe, and this is what pastors need to hear, especially leaders. Maybe the fact that we're sitting here and we love each other is the more important thing than anything else. I'm from Miami, and, that's the most of you think Orlando's bad. You don't know nothing. Or Miami is the most divided city in the entire world. And you know what happened? 6 of us began to have breakfast. I don't even know how it came about.
Wow.
2 African Americans, 2 honkies, 2 Hispanics, pastors, 6 pastors. And we got together for breakfast at first once a month, and sometimes as often as once a week. And we found a restaurant we could all abide.
Right.
And so we spent that time just getting to know each other. Getting to know each other beyond all the religious stuff and everything else.
Right.
That developed into a pastoral retreat in Miami, where maybe 200 or 300 pastors came together over a weekend, and that led to over 20,000 people.
Wow.
Being involved in the We Are One movement.
Yeah.
It morphed into justice. It morphed into love. It morphed into the strongest Christian witness you have ever seen. And I will never forget in a march we had for Jesus, leading all of these people, and there were piles of them, was a prominent African-American pastor holding hands with the chief of police, a believer in Miami.
Yeah.
Listen, guys, and we got to land this plane, but we're the only ones. That nobody else can do this.
Jesus made it very clear that love covers a multitude of faults and sins. A friend of mine told me one time, a guy I was negotiating with a contract, he said, let's put down the contract. Let's become friends. It's hard to fight with your friend.
So good. So good.
Yeah.
And, other than taking another 4 or 5 hours, we've said all we can say. So, again,
I love you, man.
Hey, I love you too. And this is Jerry Parries. He's the pastor of the Christian Family Worship Center. You ever think about just changing it and instead of making that a subtitle and calling it the Place of Grace?
No.
And my name is Steve, and we're going to try to be more regular with these pastors' chats. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.